David Park sat in his corner office on the 20th floor, staring at his computer screen with growing frustration. As the owner of Tech World, a chain of electronics stores across the city, he had built his business on one simple idea: treat every customer like family. But the numbers on his screen told a different story. The downtown store, his biggest and most important location, was struggling. Sales were down 15% from last year, and customer complaints were piling up faster than he could read them. David scrolled through the latest reviews on the company website, his heart sinking with each angry comment. Worst service ever. Staff ignored me for 20 minutes. Rude employees who act like helping customers is beneath them. Will never shop here again. Completely unprofessional. David rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. This didn't make sense. Every month, Lisa, the downtown store manager, sent him glowing reports. According to her, everything was perfect. Sales targets were being met, customers were happy, and her team was working wonderfully together. But these reviews painted a completely different picture. Real customers were having terrible experiences, and David couldn't understand why Lisa's reports never mentioned any problems. He picked up his phone and called the downtown store. Lisa answered on the third ring, her voice bright and cheerful. Tech World downtown, this is Lisa speaking. Lisa, it's David. I wanted to check in about the customer feedback we've been getting. Are you aware of any service issues? There was a brief pause. Oh, you know how it is, David. Some people just complain about everything. My team is doing great work. We had another excellent week. David frowned. But we've had several complaints about staff being rude or unhelpful. Are you sure everything is running smoothly? Absolutely, Lisa replied quickly. You know I would tell you if there were any real problems. These online reviews are probably just from people who didn't get their way about returns or discounts. After hanging up, David felt even more confused. Lisa seemed confident that everything was fine, but the negative reviews kept coming in daily. Something wasn't adding up. That evening, David shared his concerns with his wife over dinner. She listened carefully as he explained the disconnect between Lisa's reports and customer feedback. Why don't you just go see for yourself? She suggested, cutting her salad. But don't go as the boss, go as a regular customer and see what really happens. David paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. You mean go undercover? Exactly. If the staff doesn't know who you are, they'll act naturally. You'll see the real situation, not some show they put on for the boss. The idea was brilliant. David had never thought of visiting his stores anonymously before. He always called ahead, or arrived in his business suits, making it obvious he was the owner. Staff members would naturally be on their best behavior when the boss was around. The next morning, David decided to put his wife's plan into action. Instead of his usual business attire, he put on old jeans and a simple t-shirt. He found a baseball cap in his closet and wore it low over his eyes. A pair of reading glasses he rarely used completed the disguise. Looking in the mirror, David barely recognized himself. Instead of looking like a successful business owner, he looked like any ordinary customer who might walk into his store. Saturday afternoon was always the busiest time at the downtown location. Families would come in looking for computers, teenagers would browse the latest phones, and older customers would seek help with their technology problems. If there were service issues, they would definitely show up during the weekend rush. David parked his car across the street from his own store and took a deep breath. He felt nervous, which seemed silly since he owned the place, but walking in as a regular customer felt completely different from his usual visits. The automatic doors opened, and David stepped inside. The store was busy, just as he expected. Customers wandered through the aisles looking at laptops, tablets, and smartphones. But something felt wrong immediately. Near the entrance, an older gentleman stood looking confused, holding a small piece of paper. He was clearly trying to find something specific but didn't know where to look. David watched as the man approached, a young employee who was organizing phone cases. The employee, whose name tag read Tom, barely looked up when the customer spoke. The older man showed Tom his piece of paper and asked a question. Tom glanced at it quickly, pointed vaguely toward the back of the store, and returned to his work without another word. The customer looked even more confused. He stood there for a moment, clearly hoping for more help, but Tom had already turned away. Eventually, the poor man wandered off in the direction Tom had pointed, still looking lost. David felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't the kind of service he expected from his stores. He continued walking through the aisles, watching carefully. At the laptop section, a young mother was trying to compare different models while keeping her toddler entertained. She had several questions about which computer would be best for her home business. A staff member named Amy was nearby, but she seemed more interested in texting on her phone than helping customers. The mother finally approached Amy for assistance. Amy looked annoyed at being interrupted and gave short, unhelpful answers. When the customer asked about the differences between two laptop models, Amy shrugged and said, "They're basically the same. Just pick whichever one you like." David knew that wasn't true. The two laptops had completely different specifications and were designed for different purposes. Any trained salesperson should be able to explain the differences clearly. The situation got worse when the customer's toddler started getting fussy. Instead of being understanding, Amy made a comment about how some people shouldn't bring children to electronics stores. The young mother's face turned red with embarrassment. David wanted to step in and help, but he forced himself to stay in character. He needed to see more of what was really happening in his store. Moving toward the customer service desk, David observed the return and exchange process. A middle-aged woman was trying to return a tablet that had stopped working after just 2 weeks. The employee behind the counter, whose name tag read Kevin, was giving her a hard time. "Did you drop it?" Kevin asked suspiciously. "No, it just stopped turning on," the customer replied politely. "Are you sure you didn't get it wet?" "I'm positive. I've been very careful with it." Kevin sighed loudly and rolled his eyes. "Well, something must have happened to it. These tablets don't just break by themselves." The customer looked frustrated. "I understand your concern, but it really just stopped working. Don't I have a warranty?" "I suppose," Kevin said reluctantly, "but this is going to take forever to process." David was shocked. The customer was being completely reasonable, and the tablet was clearly still under warranty. Kevin was treating her like she was trying to cheat the system when she was simply asking for help with a defective product. Throughout the store, David noticed a pattern. Employees were more interested in talking to each other than helping customers. They gathered in small groups, laughing and chatting while customers wandered around looking for assistance. Several times, David watched potential buyers give up and leave because they couldn't get help. One teenager wanted to know about different phone plans but couldn't find anyone to explain the options. An elderly lady needed help setting up her new tablet, but was told that setup isn't our job. Most disturbing of all, David noticed that his employees seemed to judge customers based on their appearance. Well-dressed customers received better attention than those who looked like they might not have much money to spend. David decided to test this himself. He approached Tom, the employee who had brushed off the older gentleman earlier. "Excuse me," David said politely. "I'm looking for a laptop for my small business. Could you help me find something suitable?" Tom looked David up and down, taking in his casual clothes and baseball cap. His expression suggested he wasn't impressed with what he saw. "What's your budget?" Tom asked in a bored tone. "I'm flexible on price if I find the right machine," David replied honestly. Tom didn't seem to believe him. "Well, we have some basic models over here," he said, walking toward the cheapest laptops in the store. "These should be fine for simple tasks." David knew these were low-quality machines that would barely meet basic business needs. Tom wasn't asking about what kind of work David did or what features he needed. He was just assuming that someone dressed casually couldn't afford anything better. "Actually, I might need something more powerful," David said. "I do video editing and graphic design." Tom looked skeptical. "Video editing requires expensive equipment. Are you sure that's what you need?" The condescending tone was unmistakable. Tom was treating David like he didn't understand his own business requirements. As David continued his undercover observation, he felt sick to his stomach. This wasn't the business he had built. His employees were failing customers in every possible way, being rude, unhelpful, judgmental, and dishonest. The worst part was that Lisa, the store manager, was nowhere to be seen during any of these interactions. David finally spotted her in the back office, door closed, apparently doing paperwork while her team created chaos on the sales floor. David realized that his wife had been absolutely right. Coming undercover had revealed the truth that monthly. Reports and scheduled visits could never show. His flagship store was treating customers terribly, and now he understood why sales were declining and negative reviews were pouring in. But seeing the problem was only the first step. Now David had to figure out what to do about it. David had seen enough bad behavior in the first hour to understand why his store was failing, but he decided to stay longer. He needed to know just how deep these problems went. What he witnessed over the next few hours would shock him even more. The afternoon rush was getting busier, and more customers were coming through the doors. David positioned himself near the smartphone section where he could observe without being noticed. He pretended to look at phone cases while watching his employees interact with customers. An elderly woman with a hearing aid walked slowly into the store. She carried a small notebook and looked around nervously. David could tell she wasn't comfortable with technology, but she was trying her best to figure out what she needed. The woman approached Tom, the same employee who had been unhelpful earlier. She spoke quietly, explaining that her grandson had told her she needed something called a smart TV to watch her shows better. She had written down some notes in her notebook and was trying to read them to Tom. Instead of being patient and kind, Tom looked annoyed from the moment she started talking. He kept glancing at his watch and tapping his foot while she struggled to explain what she was looking for. "Look, lady," Tom finally interrupted. "TVs are over there somewhere. I don't really know much about that stuff." The elderly woman looked confused. "But I thought this was an electronics store. Don't you sell televisions?" "Yeah, we sell them, but I work in phones and computers," Tom replied rudely. "You'll have to find someone else." With that, Tom walked away, leaving the poor woman standing, alone. David watched as she looked around helplessly, clearly not knowing where to go or who to ask for help. David's heart broke watching this scene. This woman reminded him of his own grandmother, who had passed away a few years earlier. She was just trying to improve her TV watching experience, probably so she could see her shows more clearly. Instead of receiving kind assistance, she was being treated like a bother. The situation got even worse when the woman tried to approach another employee named Ryan. Before she could even finish explaining her needs, Ryan cut her off. "Ma'am, if you don't know what you want, maybe you should bring someone younger with you who understands this stuff," Ryan said dismissively. The elderly woman's face turned red with embarrassment. David could see tears forming in her eyes as she quietly walked toward the exit, still clutching her notebook with her grandson's advice. David wanted to run after her and help, but he knew he needed to maintain his cover to see what else was happening. He made a mental note to find her later and personally ensure she got the help she deserved. The next scene David witnessed was even more disturbing. A young couple walked in with their two small children. The husband was pushing a stroller, while the wife carried a diaper bag. They looked tired but determined as they headed toward the laptop section. David overheard them talking about needing a new computer for the husband's online college classes. Money was clearly tight, and they were trying to find something affordable that would still meet his educational needs. The family approached Amy, the employee David had seen earlier ignoring the business owner's questions. The husband politely explained that he was starting an online degree program and needed a reliable computer for his studies. Instead of showing interest in helping them find the right solution, Amy immediately looked annoyed. She glanced at the children, who were being well behaved, and made a face like they shouldn't be in the store. "Kids shouldn't really be running around in here," Amy said coldly. "There's a lot of expensive equipment they could break." The young mother looked embarrassed and tried to explain that they didn't have anyone to watch the children while they shopped. The father added that they would keep the kids close and make sure nothing was touched. Amy rolled her eyes dramatically. "Well, I guess I can show you some basic computers, but you'll need to keep those kids under control." David was furious. These were responsible parents trying to improve their family's future through education. The children weren't misbehaving at all. Yet Amy was treating them like they were unwelcome in the store. Amy showed the couple only the cheapest, lowest quality laptops available. When the husband asked about specifications and whether these computers would handle his coursework, Amy gave vague, unhelpful answers. "It's a computer," she said with obvious irritation. "It does computer stuff. If you need something fancy, you'll have to pay more money." The husband tried to explain that his classes required specific software, but Amy interrupted him. "Look, I'm not a tech expert. These are the cheap ones. Take it or leave it." David knew that several of the mid-range laptops would have been perfect for online college work and were still reasonably priced. Amy was either too lazy to explain the options or didn't think this young family deserved good service. As David continued watching, he noticed that Amy kept making comments about the children, even though they were sitting quietly in their stroller and not causing any problems. "Some people just don't think about other customers when they bring kids shopping," Amy said loudly enough for other people to hear. The young mother's face turned bright red. She whispered something to her husband, and David could see they were getting ready to leave without buying anything. Before they could go, one of their toddlers started crying softly. It wasn't loud or disruptive, just the normal sound a tired child makes. But Amy acted like it was the worst thing that could happen. "See? This is exactly what I was talking about," Amy announced to nobody in particular. "This is a business, not a daycare center." The young father looked angry for the first time, but he kept his voice calm and respectful. "We're trying to make an important purchase for my education," he said firmly. "Our children are not bothering anyone." Amy laughed mockingly. "Education? Right. Well, maybe you should focus on learning how to control your kids first." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. This employee was being incredibly rude to a young father trying to better himself through college. The family was clearly struggling financially, but working hard to improve their situation, and Amy was treating them terribly. The situation reached a breaking point when the couple's older child, maybe 3 years old, accidentally knocked over a small display of phone accessories while trying to get his parents' attention. Nothing was broken, and the items just scattered on the floor. Instead of being understanding about a normal childhood accident, Amy exploded with anger. "I knew this would happen," she shouted. "This is exactly why kids shouldn't be in electronics stores." The young parents immediately started apologizing and began picking up the scattered items. Other customers stopped what they were doing and stared at the commotion Amy was creating. "You people need to pay for anything that's damaged," Amy continued, loudly. "And you need to teach your children how to behave in public." David examined the fallen items and could see that absolutely nothing was broken or damaged. They were just phone cases and screen protectors that had fallen a few inches onto the carpeted floor. The young mother was now crying with embarrassment as she helped clean up. Her husband was trying to calm their children, who were getting upset from all the yelling and staring. "Nothing is broken," the father said quietly. "We're very sorry for the accident, but there's no damage." Amy wasn't satisfied. "There could be damage you can't see. These cases might have scratches now." David wanted to intervene so badly that his hands were shaking. This poor family was being humiliated over absolutely nothing. Amy was creating a scene and embarrassing these people in front of other customers for no reason at all. The worst part was watching the 3-year-old child who had accidentally knocked over the display. The little one was now crying and saying, "Sorry," over and over again, clearly upset about getting in trouble. Instead of reassuring the child that accidents happen, Amy continued making the situation worse. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before bringing kids where they don't belong," she said nastily. At this point, several other customers looked uncomfortable with Amy's behavior. David overheard one woman whisper to her husband that the employee was being completely unreasonable. The young family finally gathered their things and headed for the exit. As they left, David heard the father say quietly to his wife, "We'll find another store, somewhere that treats customers like human beings." David felt sick watching them go. This hard-working young family had come in ready to make a significant purchase, and they'd been driven away by one terrible employee's attitude. But the problems weren't limited to Amy and Tom. David noticed that this kind of behavior was happening throughout the store. Employees were consistently rude, dismissive, and unhelpful. They seemed to think that helping customers was beneath them. At the customer service desk, Kevin was still giving customers a hard time about returns and exchanges. David watched him argue with 3 different people, questioning their honesty and making the return process as difficult as possible. Meanwhile, Lisa, the store manager, remained locked in her office. During the entire afternoon of chaos, she never once came out to check on her team or help with the busy Saturday rush. David realized that the problems in his store went far deeper than just a few bad employees. This was a complete breakdown of customer service culture, and it was happening right under the nose of a manager who either didn't know or didn't care. As the afternoon continued, David witnessed more examples of poor service, rude behavior, and missed sales opportunities. His employees were actively driving away customers and damaging his business reputation with every interaction. The question now was what he was going to do about it. David thought he had seen the worst of his employees' behavior, but the evening was about to get much worse. As closing time approached, the store became even busier with people getting off work and families finishing their weekend shopping. Around 6 o'clock, David noticed a man in his 30s walking into the store with his 2 young children. The father looked tired after what was probably a long week at work, but he was trying to keep his kids entertained while shopping for what seemed like an important purchase. The man's name was Robert, and David could overhear him talking to his children about getting a new computer for their homework and his own work projects. The kids, a boy about 8 and a girl around 6, were being remarkably well behaved, despite being tired and hungry. Robert approached the laptop section where Tom was pretending to organize some displays. David had been watching Tom all day and knew he was one of the laziest employees in the store. "Excuse me," Robert said politely. "I'm looking for a family computer that can handle schoolwork and some basic business tasks. Could you help me find something suitable?" Tom looked up from his fake organizing and immediately judged Robert based on his appearance. Robert was wearing work clothes, a simple polo shirt and jeans that looked like he'd worn them to his job that day. His shoes were practical but not expensive, and his car keys had a simple keychain without any luxury brands. "What's your budget?" Tom asked in a tone that suggested he already assumed Robert couldn't afford much. "I'd like to stay reasonable, but I'm willing to invest in something that will last," Robert replied honestly. Tom didn't ask any follow-up questions about what Robert needed the computer for or what kind of work he did. Instead, he immediately walked toward the cheapest section of laptops. "These over here are probably more in your range," Tom said dismissively. "They're basic machines for basic needs." David knew these were the lowest quality computers in the store. They would struggle with modern software and would probably need replacing within a year or 2. For a family computer used for homework and work projects, they were completely inadequate. Robert looked at the computers Tom had shown him and seemed confused. "These seem pretty limited. I was hoping for something with better performance. My kids need to run educational software, and I occasionally work with design programs." Tom rolled his eyes like Robert was being difficult. "Well, better performance costs more money. A lot more money." "I understand that," Robert said patiently. "Could you show me some options in the mid-range? I don't need the most expensive computer, but I want something reliable." Instead of helping, Tom became more condescending. "Look, these design programs you're talking about need really high-end machines. Professional stuff. Are you sure that's what you actually need?" David could see Robert getting frustrated, but he was still trying to be polite. "I do freelance graphic design in the evenings to help support my family. I know what I need." Tom laughed mockingly. "Freelance graphic design? Right. Well, if you were a real designer, you'd know what computer to buy without asking me." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. Tom was being incredibly rude to a customer who was clearly serious about making a purchase. Robert was trying to better his family situation through extra work, and Tom was treating him like he was lying. Robert's children were starting to get restless, which was completely normal for kids who had been shopping for a while. His daughter tugged on his shirt and whispered that she was hungry. His son was looking around the store with curious eyes but staying close to his father. "Dad, can we go get dinner soon?" the little girl asked quietly. Just a few more minutes, sweetie, Robert replied gently. Daddy needs to find a computer for your school projects. Tom overheard this conversation and made a face like the children were bothering him. Maybe you should come back when you don't have kids with you. This is kind of a complicated purchase. Robert looked surprised. My children are being perfectly well behaved, and this computer is partly for their education. Kids just make everything more difficult, Tom replied rudely. They're distracting, and you can't focus on important decisions when you're babysitting. David was shocked that Tom had just called parenting babysitting. Robert was clearly a devoted father trying to make a smart purchase for his family's future. The situation got worse when Robert asked to see some of the mid-range laptops displayed in a locked case. These were exactly the kind of computers that would meet his family's needs perfectly. Those are for serious customers, Tom said dismissively. People who know what they want and can afford to pay for it. I am a serious customer, Robert replied, firmly. I'm ready to make a purchase today if I find the right computer. Tom looked skeptical. These machines start at $800. That's probably out of your budget range. David knew that Robert hadn't even mentioned a specific budget limit. Tom was just assuming that someone in work clothes with 2 kids couldn't afford a decent computer. Could I please just see the specifications? Robert asked, maintaining his patience despite Tom's attitude. Tom sighed dramatically, like Robert was wasting his time. Fine, but don't get your hopes up. These are probably too advanced for what you need anyway. As Tom reluctantly unlocked the display case, Robert's son accidentally bumped into a small stand holding phone accessories. The IUR stand wobbled slightly but didn't fall over and nothing was damaged. Tom immediately pounced on the minor incident. See? This is exactly why people shouldn't bring kids into electronics stores. Someone's going to break something expensive. Nothing was broken, Robert pointed out calmly. And accidents happen. My son said he was sorry. But Tom wasn't finished, making a scene. Kids don't belong in places like this. There's too much expensive equipment around. Other customers were starting to notice the commotion. David watched as people turned to look at what was happening, clearly uncomfortable with Tom's behavior. Robert was trying to keep the situation calm for his children's sake, but David could see he was getting angry. My children have every right to be in this store with me. We're customers and we're trying to make a purchase. Tom's response was even more inappropriate. Well, maybe you should think about whether you can actually afford to shop here before bringing your whole family. In that comment crossed a major line. Tom was now openly suggesting that Robert and his children didn't belong in the store because of their appearance and assumed financial status. Robert's face turned red with anger, but he kept his voice controlled because his children were listening. I don't appreciate your assumptions about my financial situation. I came here ready to make a significant purchase and instead, I'm being treated with complete disrespect. Instead of apologizing, Tom doubled down on his rude behavior. Look, I'm just being realistic. These computers aren't cheap and you're here with kids asking basic questions. Maybe you should try one of those big box stores where they're used to dealing with beginners. David had heard enough. This was beyond poor customer service. It was discriminatory and completely unprofessional. Tom was judging and insulting a customer based solely on his appearance and the fact that he was shopping with his children. But the situation was about to get even worse. Amy, the employee who had earlier mistreated the young family, noticed the commotion and decided to get involved. Is there a problem over here? Amy asked, but her tone suggested she was taking Tom's side before even understanding the situation. This customer is getting upset because I won't let his kids run wild in the store, Tom lied. David couldn't believe Tom was now making up stories about what had happened. Robert's children had been perfectly well behaved the entire time. Amy looked at Robert and his children with obvious disapproval. Sir, this is a business establishment. If you can't control your children, maybe you should consider shopping elsewhere. Robert was stunned. My children haven't done anything wrong. They've been standing quietly beside me this entire time. Kids that age shouldn't be around expensive electronics, Amy replied dismissively. It's just asking for trouble. Now both employees were ganging up on Robert, treating him like he was a problem customer when he had been nothing but polite and patient. Robert's daughter, who was only 6 years old, started to look upset. She could sense that the adults were angry and she was getting scared. She moved closer to her father and grabbed his hand. "Daddy, why are they being mean to us?" she asked in a small voice. That innocent question from his daughter seemed to be Robert's breaking point. He had been trying to stay calm and reasonable, but seeing his child upset by the employee's behavior was too much. "We're leaving," Robert said firmly. "This is completely unacceptable customer service." As Robert started to gather his children to leave, Tom made one final horrible comment. "Good. Maybe next time you'll think twice before wasting our time when you can't afford what we're selling anyway." Robert stopped walking and turned around slowly. David could see that he was fighting to control his temper in front of his children. "For your information," Robert said quietly but clearly, "I make good money at my job, and my freelance design work is quite successful. I was prepared to spend over $1,000 on a computer today, but I will never give a single penny to a business that treats customers and their children with such disrespect." With that, Robert took his children's hands and walked toward the exit. As they left, David heard his daughter ask, "Daddy, why didn't those people like us?" David's heart was breaking. This wonderful father and his sweet children had been humiliated and driven away by employees who were supposed to be helping them. Robert had been ready to make a major purchase, but instead he was leaving hurt, angry, and empty-handed. But David knew he couldn't reveal himself yet. He needed to see if this pattern continued, and he suspected the evening wasn't over yet. David watched Robert and his children walk toward the exit, and something inside him snapped. He had spent hours witnessing terrible customer service, but seeing that innocent little girl ask why people were being mean to her family was the final straw. He couldn't stay undercover for another minute. "Wait," David called out, jogging to catch up with Robert before he reached the door. Robert turned around, looking surprised that another customer was approaching him. His children stayed close to his side, still upset from their treatment by the employees. David pulled off his baseball cap and glasses, running his hand through his hair. "Sir, I'm terribly sorry for what just happened to you and your children." "It's not your fault," Robert replied sadly. "Some people just don't have any respect for others." "Actually, it is my fault," David said, taking a deep breath. "My name is David Park and I own this store." Robert's eyes widened in shock. He looked around to make sure he had heard correctly. "You're the owner?" "Yes, and I've been here all afternoon watching everything that happened. What my employees did to you and your family was completely unacceptable, and I am deeply sorry." Word spread quickly through the store that the owner was there. David could see employees starting to panic as they realized what had been happening. While he was watching, Tom, who had been so rude to Robert, turned pale when he saw David talking to the customer he had just insulted. Amy stopped what she was doing and stared in horror. Other employees began whispering nervously to each other. David turned his attention back to Robert and his children. "First, let me help you find exactly what you need. You mentioned you do graphic design work and need a computer for your family." Robert was still processing the situation. "Yes, but after what happened, I'm not sure I want to shop here." "I completely understand your hesitation," David said sincerely. "But please give me a chance to make this right. Your children deserve to see that not all adults behave the way my employees did today." Robert's daughter tugged on her father's shirt. "Daddy, is this man nice?" David knelt down to the little girl's eye level. "I'm very sorry that people were mean to you and your brother. That should never happen in my store or anywhere else." The little girl smiled shyly. "Thank you for saying sorry." David stood up and looked at Robert. "Let me personally help you find the perfect computer for your family's needs, and whatever price we agree on, I'm giving you a 20% discount for the terrible experience you had today." Robert hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, but only if you promise this kind of treatment won't happen to other families." "You have my word," David replied firmly. David spent the next 30 minutes working with Robert to find the ideal computer setup. He asked detailed questions about Robert's design work, the children's school requirements, and the family's budget. Together, they selected a powerful mid-range laptop that would handle everything Robert needed, plus some educational software for the kids. While they worked, David could see his employees watching nervously from across the store. Tom kept glancing over, clearly worried about his job. Amy was trying to look busy, but David could tell she was scared about what would happen next. As David helped Robert complete the purchase, he also threw in a carrying case, wireless mouse, and extended warranty, at no extra charge. "This should serve your family well for many years," David said as he processed the sale. Robert's children were now excited about the new computer and the educational games David had included. The whole mood had changed from upset and angry to happy and hopeful. "Thank you for turning this around," Robert said as he shook David's hand. "This is how customer service should always work." After Robert and his children left with their new computer, David knew it was time to address his employees. The store was nearly empty now, with just a few customers browsing quietly. David walked to the center of the store and called for everyone's attention. "All employees, please gather around. We need to have a meeting right now." 7 employees slowly made their way over, all looking nervous and uncomfortable. Lisa, the store manager, finally emerged from her office, looking shocked to see David there. "David, I had no idea you were visiting today," Lisa said, trying to sound cheerful. "How long have you been here?" "I've been here since 2 o'clock this afternoon," David replied calmly. "I came in disguise as a regular customer to see how the store really operates." The color drained from Lisa's face. She realized that David had witnessed everything that happened during her shift. David looked around at his employees, making eye contact with each one. "What I saw today was the worst customer service I've ever experienced, and I've been in retail for 15 years. Tom shifted nervously from foot to foot. Amy stared at the floor, unable to meet David's eyes. "I watched employees ignore customers, give wrong information, judge people based on their appearance, and treat families with children like they were unwelcome in our store," David continued. He turned to Tom first. "Tom, I saw you dismiss an elderly woman who needed help with a TV for her hearing problem. Instead of being patient and kind, you told her to find someone else." Tom tried to defend himself. "I don't really know much about TVs. I work mostly with phones." "That's not an excuse for being rude," David replied firmly. "Your job is to help customers or find someone who can, and I also watched you treat Robert and his children terribly, making assumptions about what they could afford based on how they were dressed." David turned to Amy next. "Amy, I saw you drive away a young family who needed a computer for college. You made comments about their children and treated them like they didn't belong here." Amy tried to speak up. "Those kids were being disruptive." "No, they weren't," David said immediately. "I watched the entire interaction. Those children were perfectly well behaved. You created a scene over absolutely nothing and embarrassed that family in front of other customers." David addressed the group as a whole. "Every single one of you treated customers poorly today. You judged people based on their appearance, ignored those who needed help, and showed no respect for the people who pay all of our salaries." Lisa tried to take control of the situation. "David, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. My team usually provides excellent service." David looked at Lisa with disappointment. "Lisa, you were locked in your office during most of these incidents. You had no idea what was happening on your sales floor." Lisa's face turned red. She couldn't deny that she had spent most of the day avoiding her management responsibilities. "The worst part," David continued, "is that we lost thousands of dollars in sales today because of poor service. That elderly woman left without buying anything. The young college family left empty-handed. Robert was ready to spend over $1,000, but almost walked out because of how he was treated. The employees were starting to realize the serious consequences of their behavior. Not only had they treated people badly, but they had also hurt the business." David took a deep breath before delivering the consequences. "Tom, your employment here is terminated immediately. The way you treated customers today was discriminatory and completely unacceptable." Tom's mouth dropped open. "You can't fire me over one bad day." "This wasn't one bad day," David replied. "This was a pattern of terrible behavior that I witnessed for hours. Pack your things and leave. David turned to Amy next. Amy, you're being placed on unpaid suspension for 2 weeks. When you return, you'll go through complete customer service retraining. If there are any similar incidents, you'll be terminated. Amy looked shocked, but didn't argue. She knew she had been caught treating customers badly. Lisa, David said, turning to his store manager, you're being transferred to a different location and demoted from management. You failed to supervise your team and allowed this toxic culture to develop. Lisa tried to protest. David, that seems harsh. I've been managing this store for 2 years. And during those 2 years, customer satisfaction has declined, sales have dropped, and negative reviews have poured in. David replied. The problems I witnessed today explain everything. David looked at the remaining employees. The rest of you will attend mandatory customer service training next week. We're going to rebuild this store's culture from the ground up. He paused and looked around the store. I started this business because I believe every customer deserves to be treated with respect and kindness. It doesn't matter what they look like, how they're dressed, or whether they have children with them. Everyone who walks through that door is important. David walked over to where Robert's family had been mistreated earlier. A 6-year-old girl asked her father why people were being mean to her family. That should never happen in any business, especially not in mine. The remaining employees looked ashamed. They were beginning to understand the real impact of their behavior. Starting tomorrow, we're implementing new policies, David announced. First, I'll be making unannounced visits to all our locations regularly. Second, we're setting up a direct customer feedback system where complaints come straight to me. Third, anyone who treats customers with disrespect will be immediately terminated. David also explained his plan to promote Kevin from the accessories department to store manager. Kevin was the only employee David had noticed actually helping customers during his undercover visit. Kevin consistently provided good service today, David explained. He was patient, knowledgeable, and respectful to every customer he helped. Kevin looked surprised and pleased by his promotion. The other employees realized that good behavior was noticed and rewarded, just like bad behavior had consequences. Over the following weeks, David implemented major changes throughout all his stores. He created a company-wide customer service training program, established regular undercover visits, and made it clear that treating customers poorly would result in immediate termination. The downtown store's transformation was remarkable. Within 3 months, customer reviews improved dramatically, sales increased by 40%, and the store became known for exceptional service. David also made sure to follow up with the customers who had been mistreated. He personally called Robert to thank him for giving the store another chance, and he tracked down the elderly woman to help her find the perfect TV setup for her needs. The experience taught David that successful business owners can never assume everything is running smoothly based on reports alone. Sometimes the only way to know what's really happening is to see it with your own eyes.